Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Our show believes that women should be treated with respect at all times and in all places. Here's today's moderator, Gloria Van Demeltrot.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of It's a Woman's World. I'm Gloria Van Demeltrot, and I'll be your moderator today, and I have several co-hosts with me. From this side, we have Nadia Jordana. Welcome, Nadia.
Hi, Gloria. I'm glad to be here today. This is going to be a good one.
I think so, too. And we have Ty Goodwin.
Hi, Gloria. I am so excited for this conversation today.
Wonderful. We're happy to have you here. And we have Jamila Pettiford.
Yes.
Glad to see you, Jamila.
Always a good time. Thank you.
Great. And our guest today is a great, wonderful person, and I can say that because actually she's my sister-in-law, and I know that will come out. This is Cassie Tyler. Welcome, Cass.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and to meet everyone else. Thank you.
Great. We think it's going to be a fun show. Cassie, how about starting out by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in quilting? This beautiful quilt on our table is one of your efforts, right?
Yes, thank you. I did not grow up quilting. I didn't really know much about quilting. My mother taught our whole family how to sew clothes, and so we made lots of clothes. There were 4 girls and a brother, so there was lots of sewing going on. And so that's what I did. And then when I married your brother, my husband, Gloria's mother has sewn quilts for years, and I had never made a quilt. And when I was in my late 30s or early 40s, I decided, you know, I can do this. I can make a quilt. So first I wanted to point out that one of your mom's wedding ring quilt, your mom gave that to us like 40 years ago, and so we still have it, and it's really beautiful.
Wow.
And then you have a quilt on your bed right now, or did?
I do. I do.
And that was made by your mom when she was 95.
95 years old.
And it's a butterfly quilt, and that's an applique quilt. So all of the pieces were hand cut and then fused on there, laminated on there.
Wow.
I'm wondering about quilting as a whole. When did that begin in history? How many hundreds of years does it go back?
Thousands.
Oh, yeah.
5,000 years ago in Egypt is when they first discovered. That's what the historians are finding. And then in the 11th and 12th century, the knights were wearing quilted clothing underneath their armor to protect their skin, and then over their armor to protect the armor from the elements. So,
What kind of fabric did they have to make those?
well, they made they had cotton, and I'm not sure everything that they had way back there, but in the United States, it was discovered that quilting basically started in about the 17th century in Salem, Massachusetts. And one of the things that the quilters used to do, which I found very surprising, was they would take paper, and I think it was newspaper, and they would make the entire quilt out of newspaper and sew that entirely together. And then when they had the fabric made, and they had the top and the bottom, they would actually line the quilt with that paper. And that's how they were able to discover the timing of one of the quilts, the Saltonstall quilt in the second year in Massachusetts. And that was in 1704, because they looked at when the outer layers of the quilt were wearing out, they just looked inside, there was the newspaper, and there was the date, 1704.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, so I'm curious, did they ever wash the quilt?
Well, I'm not sure about the paper-lined ones, and I was wondering the same thing, so I'm not sure. But maybe they didn't have the rugged washing machines that we have now, so they might have just soaked it and rinsed it out a bit. I know you can also lay quilts and blankets on grass, and the grass helps to freshen them also.
And
Because I've done-
air freshening, there was a lot of that done in Europe and in the early days. There wasn't so much soap and water washing.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the crinkliness, the
I know.
sound of sleeping under a quilt filled
That
with
would be
newspaper?
most interesting.
Absolutely. And quilting for African American folks as well goes all the way back. I was doing some research on that, and they said that it goes all the way back to the beginning of the enslavement of African folks, because quilting was something that was also done in Africa. And they believed that there were certain patterns of quilts that kept away evil spirits. They it also was used during the Underground Railroad. You knew it was a safe house when they used a black quilt. It had the pattern of the plantation and then different patterns of the stars that was used as the map as to how to get to the north. And so they would take different quilts and create quilts that had different slave patterns or patterns to the Underground Railroad so that you could reach freedom. And so quilting is as American as apple pie.
Right.
That's fascinating.
How
it is.
interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And in about the 1800s, I think it was, abolitionists were making quilts, and then they also had special designs on them, like you said, and bringing them to fairs to sell them and spread the message, and also to make some money for the effort.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
And way back, it was done more by the upper classes too,
Yes.
wasn't it?
absolutely, because they're the ones that had the time and the money, and the other women were doing spinning and weaving and sewing.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden along came commercial fabric, and that made it much more affordable to the average citizen. And so by the 1870s, I think it was, the sewing became really popular because the sewing machine was invented, and Singer came up with the installment plan. So by the 1870s, more families had a sewing machine, so everybody got involved. So that was pretty cool.
Now, I was surprised to see that quilting had become so popular with the sewing machine, because I remembered hearing stories of women sitting around doing hand sewing. And there was, hand stitching. There was something about sitting around and telling the story that kind of brought the community together.
Yes.
And so, are you a purist? Do you do by hand or do you do sewing machine?
I love sewing machines. But I think that was also when they were putting the layers together, they did that more.
Okay.
Yes, yes. My mother's sewing machine, the butterfly one that we're looking at, is done by hand.
Okay.
I think that
And she did everything by hand, didn't she?
she did everything by hand, and she had the old quilting frame.
Yeah.
Can you tell about that, Cass?
Well, we actually had that at our house too. And when Nate, our son, was little, he was maybe 4 or 5, I put that frame up, and then he helped me sew with it. But, you know, he was not real good at it, but
Yeah.
it was really fun. So
And
basically, you're just laying it on 2 metal frames, or wooden, was it?
Wooden.
Wooden frames, and then you just have about this much of it at a time, all the way down, and you sew or tie,
Yeah.
and then roll it to the next section. So
Now, with some of the quilting, do you put any jewels or anything, you know, embroidered, different type of embroider on them, or?
I just do, no.
Well, you do embroidery. You do embroidery on it.
Well, I do stitches, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And I have an embroidery machine, but I don't use that on this.
Okay. Okay. Very nice. Wow.
So, I'm curious about timing. What's the longest time you've ever invested in putting a quilt together?
7 years. This quilt.
This one.
Okay, well, let me tell you the story. This quilt started out as small wall hangings. I was in a shop in northern Minnesota, and I kept seeing, and I see them at other quilt shops too, and I saw these small wall hangings, so I thought, okay, I'll make those. I really like them, so I made 3. Then I looked at my walls at home, and I decided, you know, I don't really have any room for these, so I think I'll put them together in a quilt. So that's what this is. It started out as wall hangings and ended up being a quilt. And I really like the sewing, and that's making the individual squares, for me, is the easy part. What was difficult on this quilt was I went to a seamstress at a quilt shop in Rogers, Minnesota, and So I said, how do I put these squares together? Because I had no idea. I said, do I make them mirror images of them, each other, so when they fold over, they're exactly the same? And she said, no, you don't want to do that at all. You want to offset those. So then you can have movement with your eye.
Oh, wow.
So once she taught that to me, it was like, oh, that makes sense. And then she said, I think you need more squares. So I only had like 9 or 10 at that time. And I mean, I laid them on the bed, a king-size bed, and there was a lot of space between them. But so I went home and like made twice as many more, probably 10 or 11 more. And then when I laid them on the bed, I could really see that what she was saying, because some of them are tall, some are wide, some are small, and one of them in the center is very large. And then when I did that, not only could I see how to place them, but some of them, 2 of them, I just didn't care for. They just, like the one in the middle, I love that pine, I think it's called pine cone? Quilt, anyway, the square in the middle. And the original one was way more pointy and jaggy and wasn't really very friendly looking. So I remade it.
Oh, nice.
And did you use patterns to make these squares, or?
All of these were patterns that I'd find at different quilt shops. And then I just liked either the colors or I liked the shape, and most of them I followed the colors that they had planned. But then I changed some.
And you could design your own patterns too if you wanted.
Yes, I finally did that on the last square. This one right here, I think it is. I took a kid's coloring book, and I just took a piece of paper and laid it on top, traced it, and then made that square from that.
Wow.
And they didn't have the stem as very well detailed, so I just copied some other stems on here. But that's what I wanted to do, was to get to more creating.
Whatever works.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Well, I know that this quilt, there's a difference between, I think you call this an applique quilt,
Yep.
and a piece quilt or whatever. Can you tell more about that, please?
Well, I would say your mom's is more, the first one, the wedding ring, is more of a piece, and then people just take, strips and squares and just like sew them together to make a shape and then connect all those squares. Applique, in my next quilt, is the peachy one that you have there. You see the cat flower pot? That's an applique. And then the next one that I did, that was the one that I finally decided to make when I was like in my late 30s, early 40s. And then the next one I made was this ocean fruit one that you see here.
I like that. That's pretty.
And that was actually just one big piece of fabric, and I didn't like the layout of all the fish, so I cut every one of those out, and then I put the lamination on the back. Let me explain that. And then I want to explain one more. And then I laid them in like schools. There are 3 tortoises there and
I
one
see that.
seahorse.
Nice, yeah.
And then the last one that I made, this one, the dream quilt, is the one that I made probably 8 years ago, I guess, 8 or 9 years ago. But here's how applique works. You just buy a fusible. There's lots of different types. There are some that are just flat and easy to cut out. And then you decide what your pieces that you want to laminate on there. So I cut out this flower. Usually I do, you can see on this quilt that I did individual petals and stems. But I cut this out, and then I cut this out of the fusible, and then I laid this on here, peeled it off, and this has a sticky on there right now. Now I lay this on the top of my quilt that I want to laminate it to, and that will never hold the way it is. So now I would have to iron that on there up to 20 seconds, and then it's ready to be washed. But there's one other thing that really needs to be done to help it to hold together. Then I stitch around it. And my machine has 120 stitches, so I have 1 or 2 that I like the most because of the way the edges work, but there's a lot of machines that have stitches that will hold this. So that would make it very washable.
Very nice.
That's funny. I remember being fascinated with my grandmother's sewing machine because it had all those stitches, but I just never knew what to use them for. And I just want to put them in stitches on all the clothes because they look like so much fun.
They do look like fun.
Yes. And I could see this being something that really would help to center yourself. Maybe if you're kind of experiencing something or you need to think for a while, that you could really sit down and really have time to just really think, to really bring about peace, you know, if you want to be peaceful and just quiet. Now when you're stitching, do you listen to music or is it just quiet? Do you watch TV?
I would say it brings peace, but also pray. Pray a lot, and that, you know, is a nice way to just have the time.
To relax and be yourself and be creative.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, how lovely. And another thing I want to be sure we talk about there in using the sewing machine to embroider that, you could do that by hand as well.
Oh,
you
absolutely,
could,
yes.
You could
That's what
hand
your mother
embroider
did.
that, yes.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Do you see this as an art that's going away with the younger generation? Like, I can't imagine millennials sitting down to quilt.
I would say that
So-
there are more people quilting now, like in the 2000s,
Wow,
since the bicentennial when quilting came back, because during the 50s and 60s, I think it was the 50s, there was very little interest in quilting.
Interesting.
And then with the bicentennial, it just blossomed because people wanted to show the, you know, national pride, and then again, a lot of people do quilting for the artistry of it.
Yeah.
And they really look at that. And then of course, a lot of it's done for, you know, mission group.
Okay.
And sharing it with different groups that need it.
And for warmth, what do
Warmth.
you put inside the quilt? Not newspapers
No,
anymore.
I don't. I don't use newspaper. I always check it out. I try to have something that's at least 50% cotton.
Okay.
So they have like a 40-60, and you can go and buy that. And anytime you want any kind of help with this, just go to any one of the quilt shops or the sewing shops, and there are always people that are willing to help. But
Did you take classes to learn to do this? Or?
Not this particular thing, but years ago I took some sewing classes mostly for clothing. You know, if I wanted to learn how to do, you know, lapels or something.
Now, do you knit as well, or?
I've tried that.
Okay, okay.
I'm not real good at it.
Okay,
And I'm not patient.
Okay.
One stitch at a time. I like this, you know, all of a sudden you put a flower on, it's all there. That's what I prefer.
Okay, very nice. Yeah.
So, but I think, knitting is wonderful. You know, and I love the feel of it too.
I do too.
Are some of the different techniques harder for you as opposed to maybe someone you know and says, that's easy, this is what's hard for me?
Yes, I would say that probably quite a few people would find this very tedious, but I like this, and I like the colors, and I like the designs, and I like making the individual squares mostly. That's what I like. But I have a friend who sews circles around me. She makes about a quilt every day.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
Oh my
she's
word.
really, really amazing. A lot of people. She just organized the quilt bingo at church, and with two other people, but her second year, and it brought in a lot of money for the church and for the repairs. But there are people that would not necessarily like this applique style.
Okay.
But that's the one thing I wanted to say, is that if a person's interested, you don't have to make something large like this. I just wanted to make something that was usable, and I knew what we needed a blanket. So I would say, you know, make a wall hanging or make table placemats. Or, you know, there's all sorts of things that a person can make.
Absolutely.
Is
And
there
in fact-
such a thing as the average cost of like a bed quilt?
It depends upon if, I don't really know. I would say 250.
I
don't
was
know if
thinking
that's-
more. I saw something online that said upwards of $800. If you count the hours and the time you're putting,
I never
not just the
count that.
cost of materials.
Oh, yeah. I could see that.
I just made one for 350, and I thought that was a lot. So,
That it cost you $350?
because of the fabric,
Okay.
and I bought kind of a kit from a shop, and then I had to, of course, make it bigger because our bed is king size,
Yeah.
and then I had to buy the backing, and then there was more to it still.
Yeah.
And then the batting, which isn't that expensive, but it all adds up.
I think there could be more if there was customization. I remember seeing someone that had taken photographs of the family and turned them into prints and then quilted it all together. And those
Yes.
kind of things they have more sentimental value. They're things that you pass down in your family. And I could see those being worth the $800,000s of dollars that people would pay.
Yeah, that would be fun.
colors are very important, and you have a real eye for color, I've noticed in the quilts that you have made. Can you tell us a little bit about choosing those colors, and is it complicated? How do you do it?
Well, first of all, I start with the small patterns, and many of those have these colors in them. And then from there, when I put it together, of course, I needed borders, and I'm insane about batiks. I love batiks, and so I just go to that department, or the department in my living room, and the boxes and the totes, and I look through there to see what I have that would coordinate. And then I want the back to coordinate with it too. So a lot of times will buy large king-size type batiks, and I have those at home. But I mean, I don't have that much extra stuff, but maybe 2 totes full of some different batiks. But I just like those colors.
Yeah.
So I like, other colors, but maybe it didn't fit in with this.
Okay, so it's a matter of just choosing
Preference.
to your eye what
Yes.
works together.
Yes.
Many people have clothing that belong to a loved one. I've seen people make quilts out of jeans,
Yeah.
yeah, that sort of material. Can you tell about that?
I don't really know much about it, but I've always thought that would be fascinating. Also, how about all the teenagers that have T-shirts from their high school
yes,
days,
yes.
and they like to make a quilt. I have a friend who just did that and took her son's T-shirts and cut out the front. And then I think you have to put a fusible on the back of those so that they don't stretch, but I don't know.
Interesting.
Okay.
I know that that method you were talking about with just taking strips was something that a lot of African American communities did, and they called it, I think, pine cone quilts, because they couldn't afford like the bulks of material and the bulks of material. So what they would do is they would take strips from anywhere, and so like I think you mentioned that a little bit, the pine cone, but it's that pointy,
Yes,
you know.
this middle one.
Yeah.
What is that? Cone
Yeah,
flower. I
those
guess
shapes.
It's a cone flower.
And they just make quilts. Their whole quilting pattern is based on that shape.
Oh, very cool.
Oh,
Nice,
interesting.
nice.
Or are there strips of cloth? We're talking about little strips and tiny pieces
I've seen that
are
too.
hand sewn together
Yes.
to make
Yeah.
a square.
I've seen that too.
Yeah.
Well, and way back, I remember as a child, there were 2 different kinds of crazy quilts. One was all the different scraps and pieces, all odd shapes put together of thinner fabrics. But the one that, and as a child, I didn't like it because this really meant we were poor. And we never saved them, and I really wish I had one.
Yes.
It was a crazy quilt. It was on my bed, and it was made from squares of heavier fabrics from coats and jackets, wool, and all those different, definitely warm style fabrics. And we didn't save that because, well, that was just from the farm. You know, we were poor. Someone gave it to us.
Right. I think my mother made a quilt of my dad's old suits. So the whole thing was made of his suits. And I have heard of someone who made a quilt of the ties, of men's
Yes,
ties.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
That would be interesting to do.
Also, way back in the about 1940s and 50s, feed sack quilts were very popular, and there were thousands of those made because the feed came in those sacks, and they also had designs on them. And so when women saw those, I could do something with that. Made feed sack quilts, and there were literally thousands. So
Is there a quilting museum somewhere here in the
I
U.S.?
believe there's one on the East Coast.
Okay.
But I don't know.
That would be
for sure.
fun to
There's
see
gotta
and hear
be
the
one.
stories. Yeah.
We could start one.
Exactly.
There are some gatherings, some conventions. I have a girlfriend who was a big quilter, and it was somewhere in the Midwest, down, maybe it was Missouri, or maybe it was farther, but it was a great big quilting. She put pictures online, and I don't quilt, but it looked like fun. It looked like a fun thing to quilt.
We have many people at our church who make quilts to be given away, and they don't do this process type of quilting. They'll put 2 pieces of fabric together and tie them.
Yes, those are very fast.
Yes,
Very fast.
but it's a quilt. It's a
Yeah, and
quilt.
it's warm.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and they can give it away, so that's a great idea.
What do you mean by tie them?
like
Is it
knot
like
Well, they have one piece of like
Backing.
backing that's made out of sweatshirt material or a blanket or something, and then one on top something in the middle to keep it warm,
batting.
and then another piece on top, and then they stretch it out, and every 6 inches or so they use yarn on a needle and just stick
okay.
it through and tie it.
Yeah.
That's all they do.
Pieces.
And that holds it together then for years.
And
Sounds
the
like a fun
ends
project.
you can cut in and just tie those in a knot.
Oh, I did one of those.
Yes.
That was fun.
Oh, they are fun.
Also, if people want some ideas as to how to learn about this, there are some great places. You can go into any quilt shop. You can go online. There are tutorials, and I mean, it's just amazing how many resources there are out there, and people are very, very kind. They want to help, people.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. So it's current too.
Very
so
current.
In answer to your question,
Yeah, I was thinking about
Ty, that people are doing it now.
Yes.
The little quilts that I was talking about are basically lap robes.
Yes.
And kids love them. The teenagers love those.
Absolutely.
That would be a fun thing to do as a family, to make
Yeah.
a couple of those, or make them out of T-shirts, as you said.
Yes, right.
Or even family memories. I mean, I know that in the summertime when our children are out of school and they're busy, this seems like a great project to create like little family memories of
Absolutely.
summertime
great
fun.
idea.
Yeah. So this is great. Awesome.
I hate to be the bad guy, but our time is getting short. Cassie, is there any final news that you want to leave with
I
us?
would just encourage people to go ahead and say, I think I can, I think I can, I hope I can, I know I can, I can, I can. I will, I will.
Great. Oh, that's wonderful.
Awesome.
Cassie Tyler, thank you so much. You've been a great guest.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone else for being
And our
here.
co-host, Jamela, thank you so
And
much.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to
Great
meet you.
work.
Thank
Great
you.
work.
Right. And Ty, so good to have you. Did you enjoy it?
I did. This was more fun than I thought it was going to be. And I have all these questions now that I'm going to go research later.
And Nadia, wasn't it fun?
I enjoyed it totally.
Great. And we hope our audience did. We hope to see you next time on It's a Woman's World.